If you're someone who's applying to medical school, then you definitely want to stand out. Now, there's loads of ways to potentially stand out, but one really good way to do so is through further reading. Further reading is an amazing way to learn more about medicine, improve your understanding, and also show admissions tutors that you have genuine curiosity for the subject. Anyone can say that they're passionate about medicine, but how many people can actually say that they've taken time out of their day to read further into it and to learn more about it? There are so many books around medicine, and so knowing where to start can be really difficult and challenging. However, in this video, I'm hopefully going to make that a lot easier for you by giving you 5 book recommendations that I really think can help you improve your understanding of medicine and also stand out more in the application process. I especially think you should stay tuned for the 4th book. It's one of my favorites and it's the one that I've probably learned the most from. Now, the first book is a book by Paul Kalanithi called When Breath Becomes Air. Now, this is one of the first books I actually read around medicine, and to this day is still one of my favorite. It's one that I always recommend to people. It's quite a straightforward read, it's not too long, but it's one that you can definitely learn a lot from. It's a very unique story about a neurosurgeon who gets stage 4 metastatic lung cancer, and it's just a kind of biography of his life and what he did as a result of his diagnosis and how he balanced that with his life and medicine. A book that you can learn a lot from, and it's definitely one that you want to pick up. The next book is This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. Now, this book is a very, very popular book. I remember at one point this was all over bookshops around the country. Every bookshop that I went into would have this on display. This book is written in the form of a diary of a doctor who worked in the NHS, and it just kind of documents his experience starting off in the healthcare system and kind of progressing through it and making his way up the ranks. This book is actually written by a doctor who quit the NHS, and he goes into detail about why he ended up quitting. And I know it's a bit ironic, this video is made for medical applicants and I'm recommending a book about a doctor who left the NHS. However, I feel like there's definitely a lot to learn in terms of the work life of a doctor working in the NHS. The reason this is important is because medical schools are looking for a certain type of student. They're looking for students who have a realistic understanding of medicine, and that includes having an understanding of some of the lows of medicine. And I feel like this book is a really good way to get a better understanding of that. Another benefit is that this author is now a comedian, and so the book is quite light-hearted, it's quite funny. It's also quite an easy read, meaning that even if you're someone who's not super into reading, it's a good book to pick up. Following along from that is another book by Adam Kay called Twas the Night Shift Before Christmas. Now, I actually got gifted this book and I must say it was a very good read. If you enjoy this book, then you'll definitely enjoy this one, because obviously they're written by the same author, they have a very similar writing style. Again, another very easy to read book. In fact, I actually think I finished this book in a day, so it's not one that takes a lot of time. It's a very similar structure to the previous book in that it's a diary entry, but it kind of focuses more around his experience during Christmas time, which is obviously one of the biggest kind of national holidays in this country. It's a good way to understand how different doctors' lives might be compared to someone of the general public. I mean, Christmas is a day where a lot of people are celebrating, but in this book he's talking about his experience actually working on that day and what it's like. So definitely, again, another really good book to give you an understanding of the work-life balance of a doctor. Now for the 4th book, the book that I was talking about at the start, and this is a book by author Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. A funny story about this book, I actually picked this book up in year 11 and I got to about halfway before I actually stopped reading the book because I got bored of it. Now, I know I'm not selling the book really well, but when I picked it up again in about year 12, year 13 time, my perspective of it completely changed, and I found this to become actually one of my most favorite books. In fact, you can see how much I annotated it because my EPQ was largely inspired by this book. This book is definitely for someone who might be a bit more mature. If you don't like reading as much, then this book can get very, very boring. And it's mainly because it talks about the very in-depth parts of medicine. So things like end-of-life care, things like dealing with death, concepts such as, what is important in a doctor. Now, these are actually concepts that not many people probably delve into, which is why reading this book and truly taking the time to understand it can be an amazing way for you to stand out amongst the crowd. I definitely think this book gave me a more mature understanding of medicine and a more realistic understanding, and one that I probably wouldn't have developed had I not read this book. The final book is one that I actually have on Kindle by Dr. David Knott called War Doctor. Now, this book is all about a doctor who basically goes to countries who are suffering from war and treats patients there. The reason this book is so unique is because this doctor clearly isn't working in a standard medical environment, if that makes sense. And so you kind of get a different insight and a new kind of perspective. It's really interesting to hear from the perspective of a doctor who's willing to put himself at risk just to help others. And so there's definitely a lot to learn in that sense when it comes to thinking about why you want to actually study medicine. And that's definitely the key thing I learned from this book, kind of improving my perception of what the benefits of healthcare really is and what I can potentially do one day as a doctor. I think this book also really shows you the frustration of being a doctor and kind of being in a position where you want to help patients, but you sometimes don't have the resources to do so. Now, obviously in this book, that's a bit more extreme because he's in a war-torn country where obviously facilities and equipment will be limited. However, that's not to say that in a normal NHS environment, this is also not the case. You see all the time on the news about underpaid doctors, about understaffed hospitals. Even though this book is about a doctor who helps in wars, that's not to say that you can't talk about it in your interviews and use it to kind of highlight your motivations to study medicine. Now, it's all well and good reading these books, but talking about these books is another challenge, and I definitely think that is something that comes with practice. However, if you'd like to see how I talked about some of these books in my personal statement, then check out this video here where I go through my personal statement and you can hopefully get an understanding of how I talk about them.